According to the history books, the apocalypse arrived on a mundane Tuesday. Humanity held its collective breath as the shadow of a Manhattan-sized dreadnought fell across the Atlantic, signaling a battle where we were completely outmatched. Lacking grand stellar fleets or shimmering energy shields, Earth had nothing but flesh, bone, and a desperate, primal instinct to survive. An ultimatum broadcast in perfect English across every screen demanded immediate surrender or outright extinction, leaving world leaders trembling in their underground bunkers. Yet, deep within a subterranean command center in Colorado, one man stepped up to a microphone, cleared his throat, and shattered the cosmic silence with a two-word response that changed the universe forever. It started not with a dramatic explosion or a beam of light from the heavens, but with a whisper of data in a cold, sterile room. On October 14th, inside the deeply buried corridors of NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Major Jonathan Blake was staring at a telemetry screen that was feeding data from the Deep Space Network. For 3 hours, the anomalous readings had been dismissed as a software glitch, a ghost in the machine caused by a recent solar flare. But the ghosts were moving, and they were decelerating. "General Reed," Major Blake called out, his voice betraying a slight tremor that years of military discipline couldn't entirely mask. "You need to see this. The Webb telescope just corroborated the DSN data. We have multiple contacts passing the orbit of Jupiter." General Thomas Reed, a man whose face was etched with the stress of 30 years of geopolitical brinkmanship, walked over to the console. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing at the cluster of red dots projected on the dark screen. "Meteor shower? A fragmented comet?" "No, sir," Blake replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard to bring up the trajectory analysis. "They're bleeding speed. Sir, objects in a vacuum don't hit the brakes. They're engaging in a controlled deceleration burn. And their mass. General, the lead object, has a radar cross-section larger than the island of Manhattan." The silence in the room became absolute. The rhythmic humming of the servers seemed to deafen. Reed didn't hesitate. "Initiate DEFCON 2. Wake the president. Get me the Pentagon, and patch a secure line to the UN Security Council. God help us, it's not a drill." Within 24 hours, the world as humanity knew it ceased to exist. The Armada did not bother with stealth. They arrived with the terrifying majesty of gods, casting long, unnatural shadows over the Earth's surface. There were 36 ships in total. They were jagged, brutalist constructs of a metal that absorbed sunlight rather than reflecting it, making them look like tears in the fabric of the sky. One positioned itself directly over the Atlantic seaboard, another over the South China Sea, a third over the heart of Europe. Down on the surface, panic erupted. The global markets collapsed in a matter of minutes. Highways became graveyards of abandoned vehicles as people tried to flee cities, though there was nowhere to run. The illusion of human supremacy, built over thousands of years of conquering nature and each other, evaporated the moment the sky turned black. In a highly classified, deep underground, continuity of government bunker beneath Mount Weather, Virginia, Michael Sullivan sat at the edge of a mahogany conference table. Sullivan wasn't a general, nor was he an elected official. He was a senior strategic advisor for DARPA and a black book negotiator who specialized in zero-sum game theory. He was the man the government called when standard diplomacy failed and the only options left were unthinkable. "President Kensington is secure," a Secret Service agent announced, the heavy blast doors sealing shut behind the commander-in-chief. Arthur Kensington looked pale, his suit wrinkled, the weight of 8 billion lives suddenly crushing down on his shoulders. Status report, Kensington croaked, taking his seat at the head of the table. General Reed's voice crackled through the secure, quantum-encrypted speaker system from Cheyenne Mountain. Mr. President, our conventional forces are on high alert. However, our targeting systems are failing to get a lock on the vessels. Dr. Boyd from Lockheed's Advanced Aerospace Division is here with me. She has the preliminary scans. Dr. Evelyn Boyd's voice replaced the general's. Mr. President, it's a nightmare. The hulls of these ships are generating a localized gravitational distortion field. Any ICBM or conventional kinetic weapon we fire will simply be deflected away by their gravity well. We are entirely toothless. If they want to, they could drop rocks from orbit and wipe out our major population centers without firing a single weapon. Sullivan listened quietly, steepling his fingers. He stared at the live satellite feed of the massive dreadnought hovering over the Atlantic. It sat there, silent, an apex predator watching a cornered mouse. It didn't need to attack. The terror was doing the work for them. So we can't shoot them, President Kensington said, rubbing his temples. Have they tried to communicate? As if on cue, the lights in the bunker flickered. The secure screens, which were supposedly disconnected from the outside internet and air-gapped against any cyber intrusion, suddenly turned a uniform, blinding white. "Sir," an NSA technician shouted from the corner of the room, "we're being overridden, all of it. Television, radio, military bands, civilian internet. Something is broadcasting on every frequency on the planet." The static on the screens resolved into a shape. It was vaguely humanoid, but that was where the similarities ended. The entity was clad in an ornate, deep crimson armor that seemed to pulse with an internal, bioluminescent light. Its face was angular, almost reptilian, with 4 completely black, soulless eyes that seemed to stare directly through the camera and into the minds of every human watching. When it spoke, the voice was an artificial amalgamation, a perfect, unaccented English synthesized from harvesting hours of global broadcast data. Yet, the cold, metallic undertone betrayed its alien origin. Inhabitants of Earth. I am Fleet Commander Varric of the Kalen Empire. You are currently viewing the vanguard of the Kalen highly mechanized subjugation fleet. We have scanned your world. We have cataloged your resources. Your planet holds rich deposits of heavy metals and an abundance of liquid water, which the Empire claims by right of superior force. The voice paused, letting the words sink in. In London, riots stopped as people stared up at the screens in Piccadilly Circus. In Tokyo, millions stood frozen in the streets. Your civilization is primitive. Your weapons are irrelevant. You are classified as an indigenous nuisance, a level 4 biological infestation. We offer you one, and only one, mercy. Surrender unconditionally. Deactivate your military installations. Offer yourselves as indentured labor for the extraction of this planet's resources. If you comply, a mathematically calculated subset of your population will be allowed to survive in designated reservations. If you resist, your cities will be reduced to ash, your oceans boiled, and your species erased from the galactic record. You have precisely 12 of your Earth hours to transmit your total surrender. Varric out. The screen snapped back to the military feeds. Chaos erupted in the Mount Weather bunker. The French Prime Minister, on a secure video link, was visibly trembling. "We must capitulate. Arthur, we must. They bypass our firewalls in seconds. They manipulate gravity. If we fight, we die. If we surrender, we die slower and in chains," General Reed barked through the comms. "I say we launch everything we have, every nuke, every railgun prototype. We overload their shields with sheer yield. Did you not hear me, General? Dr. Boyd snapped back. Their shields aren't energy barriers. They are gravity wells. A nuclear detonation outside the hull will just be compressed and vented into space. We'd be throwing firecrackers at a tank. President Kensington looked around the room, his eyes desperate for a solution that didn't exist. Sullivan, you've been quiet. What does game theory say about this? Michael Sullivan slowly stood up. He adjusted his tie, his face an unreadable mask of calm. Game theory says that when the opponent holds all the cards, you don't play their game. You flip the table. Flip the table? Kensington scoffed. With what, Michael? They have gravity weapons. We have F-35s and ICBMs that can't even touch them. We don't use our conventional weapons, Sullivan said, walking over to the main console. Mr. President, General Reed, 7 years ago, an anomalous object crashed deep beneath the ice in Antarctica. The public was told it was a meteorite. The truth, known only to DARPA and a select group at Lockheed Martin, was that it was a scout drone, an alien drone. The room went dead silent. Dr. Boyd gasped. The Aurora Project. Yes, Evelyn. Project Aurora, Sullivan confirmed. We couldn't reverse engineer their gravity drives. Our metallurgy wasn't advanced enough, but we did figure out how their navigation and propulsion networks communicate. We learned that their ships rely on a highly synchronized, interconnected quantum tether system to maintain their fleet formations and shield frequencies in local spacetime. It's a closed-loop system, incredibly advanced, incredibly secure. And, Kensington asked, leaning forward, a tiny spark of hope igniting in his chest. And, Sullivan smiled, a cold, predatory smile. We realized that if an invading fleet ever showed up, we couldn't beat them in a fistfight. So, we built a trap. Mr. President, I need authorization to initiate Project Damocles. General Reed's voice was hesitant. Damocles? I've never heard of it. You weren't supposed to, Thomas, Sullivan replied. Over the last 5 years, under the guise of deploying Starlink satellites and cleaning up space junk, the United States, alongside the UK and Japan, has placed over 400,000 microsatellites into low Earth orbit. They look like dead tech, debris, but they are actually quantum-entangled signal repeaters, loaded with a highly specialized electromagnetic logic bomb derived from the crashed drone's code. Sullivan brought up a holographic projection of Earth. It was surrounded by a dense, almost invisible mesh of red dots. The Kalen ships are currently sitting right in the middle of our minefield, Sullivan explained. Right now, they are ignoring the satellites because they read as primitive, harmless human trash. But if we activate Damocles, the entire network will simultaneously pulse on their exact fleet command frequency. It won't destroy their ships, but it will violently scramble their gravity drives. The drives will invert. Invert? Dr. Boyd whispered, her eyes widening in horrific realization. Sullivan, if a gravity drive inverts inside a planetary atmosphere, the ship will crush itself into a singularity, Sullivan finished. They won't just fall out of the sky. They will be imploded by their own mass. But we only get one shot. The moment we trigger it, they will realize what's happening. The pulse takes exactly 90 seconds to synchronize and fire. During those 90 seconds, they will likely try to glass the planet. Kensington looked at the clock. They had 3 hours left on the ultimatum. So, we have to distract them. Keep them talking while the system boots up, Sullivan nodded. Exactly. And we don't do it from a position of weakness. We do it from a position of absolute unyielding arrogance. We need to make Commander Varick hesitate. An alien species that relies on overwhelming technological superiority expects fear. They expect panic. They do not expect us to look them in the eye and tell them to go to hell. The final hour approached. The tension across the globe was palpable. Cities were burning as anarchy took hold. But inside the command centers, a terrifying, silent focus had settled over the remnants of humanity's leadership. Damocles is online and standing by, Dr. Boyd reported from Cheyenne Mountain. All 400,000 nodes are dormant, waiting for the execution command. Time to synchronization? Sullivan asked, standing in front of the primary communication array. 90 seconds from the moment you hit the button, Boyd confirmed. Sullivan, if they fire their main plasma batteries during those 90 seconds, we lose the eastern seaboard of the United States, most of Western Europe, and Japan. They won't, Sullivan said, adjusting his suit jacket one last time. Predators like to play with their food. They want to savor the surrender. Open the channel, President Kensington ordered, stepping back into the shadows. Michael, it's on you. Major Blake routed the signal, overriding the alien blockade using the backdoor frequency they had extracted from the scout drone years prior. Aboard the Kalen flagship, Fleet Commander Varak stood on the bridge, surrounded by holographic displays of a terrified, burning Earth. He was bored. This was the fifth world he had conquered this cycle. The humans were predictable. They ran, they screamed, they burned. Suddenly, the main view screen on the bridge flickered. The image of the burning cities vanished, replaced by a visual of a dimly lit subterranean room. In the center stood a single human male in a dark suit, hands casually resting behind his back. Varak hissed, his 4 eyes narrowing. A human had managed to slice into his secure comms. Human, you are early. Have your leaders decided to accept the inevitable? In the Mount Weather bunker, Sullivan stared directly into the camera lens. He didn't blink. He didn't sweat. He channeled every ounce of ice-cold defiance his species had forged over millennia of brutal survival. Commander Varak, Sullivan began, his voice smooth, conversational, lacking even a hint of fear. I am Michael Sullivan, speaking on behalf of the combined nations of Earth. We have received your ultimatum. We have reviewed your demands. Behind his back, Sullivan's finger hovered over a small red biometric pad on a hidden data pad. And, Varak sneered, leaning forward, eager to hear the words of capitulation. And, Sullivan said, his voice dropping an octave, we find your terms unacceptable. A ripple of confusion crossed Varak's alien features. Unacceptable? You are in no position to negotiate, human. Look at your skies. My weapons are currently trained on your largest population centers. I can extinguish 1 billion of your kind with a single thought. I know, Sullivan replied calmly. But you've made a miscalculation, Commander. You brought a fleet to conquer a world, assuming we would fight you with our weapons. We are a primitive species, as you pointed out. But we are incredibly spiteful. We don't like losing. Varak let out a guttural clicking sound that translated as a laugh. Spite will not save you from orbital fire. No, Sullivan agreed, but a localized gravity inversion will. Varak froze. His translator hesitated on the phrase. What did you say? I said, Sullivan stepped closer to the camera, his eyes burning with a dark, intense fire. We cracked your scout drone's tech 5 years ago. We know how your drives work, and right now, your entire fleet is sitting inside a web of 400,000 dormant logic bombs. If I press this button, your interconnected fleet command will experience a quantum feedback loop. Your gravity shields won't just drop, Varak. They will turn inwards. Silence reigned on the alien bridge. The Kalan officers scrambled to check their scanners. "He is bluffing," Varak snarled, but a sliver of doubt crept into his voice. "Our scanners show nothing but primitive orbital debris, space junk." "Check the quantum signature of that junk," Sullivan countered smoothly. "Check frequency band 4 Alpha Tango. See for yourself." 10 seconds passed in agonizing silence. Then a Kalan officer shrieked in their native tongue. Varak's face contorted in sheer horror as the data fed into his mind. The human wasn't lying. They were surrounded. "You wouldn't," Varak whispered, the arrogance completely gone, replaced by a cold terror. "If you activate that trap, the resulting gravitational implosions will rip your atmosphere apart. Your planet will suffer catastrophic tectonic failure. You will destroy yourselves just to kill us." Sullivan smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. It was the smile of a species that had evolved by hunting mammoths with sharp sticks. "I know," Sullivan said softly. He pulled his hand from behind his back and held up the datapad, pressing his thumb onto the red biometric scanner. Beep! A massive, invisible shockwave pulsed outward from the Earth. "Damocles is active," Dr. Boyd screamed over the comms. 90 seconds to drive inversion." Varak slammed his fists onto his console. "Disengage drives, fire all weapons, burn them." Ah, Sullivan chided, his voice booming over the Kalan bridge. "If you try to move, the drives invert instantly. If you fire your main batteries, the power draw will trigger the logic bomb early. You are trapped, Varak." "Surrender!" Varak roared, his composure shattering. "Deactivate your weapon, and we will spare your world. Stop the sequence. Surrender!" Sullivan adjusted his cuffs, looking up at the alien commander, who now looked very, very small. "You first. T-minus 85 seconds." The command bridge of the Kalan flagship descended into absolute bedlam. The previously stoic and disciplined alien crew members were now scrambling across their bioluminescent consoles, their four-fingered hands a blur of panicked motion. Alarms that had not sounded in centuries, alarms designed to warn of catastrophic engine failure, shrieked through the cavernous metal halls. Fleet Commander Varak stood paralyzed for 3 agonizing seconds. His mind, conditioned by decades of overwhelming, asymmetrical warfare against inferior species, refused to process the reality of the situation. This was a Level 4 world. They had primitive fission weapons and rudimentary chemical rockets. They were not supposed to be capable of quantum-entangled cyber warfare. "Sub-Commander!" Varak roared over the din of the sirens. "Sever the fleet's quantum tether network. Isolate the gravity drives. Cut the hard lines if you have to." "I am trying, Commander," the sub-commander shrieked, his scaled hands flying across the holographic interfaces. The human logic bomb. It is not merely disrupting our network. It is rewriting the foundational operating syntax of our gravitational array. The command to sever the tethers is being routed back as a command to increase network density. It has barricaded us inside our own systems. Down in the subterranean depths of Mount Weather, the silence was agonizing. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beeping of the countdown timer on the main projection screen. T-minus 70 seconds. Michael Sullivan did not move. He kept his eyes locked perfectly on the camera lens, transmitting a look of cold, unblinking death up to the alien fleet. Behind him, President Arthur Kensington was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard, his knuckles were bone white. "Sullivan!" General Thomas Reed hissed, stepping close enough that Sullivan could feel the heat radiating from the general's uniform. Our seismologists are predicting that if those 36 ships invert their gravity fields simultaneously, the resulting shockwaves will trigger magnitude 9.0 earthquakes across every major fault line. Coastal cities will be wiped out by tsunamis. We are signing our own death warrant. We were already dead, Thomas, Sullivan replied softly, his voice not carrying to the microphone, picking up his feed to the aliens. Varric wasn't going to put us on reservations. You heard Dr. Boyd. They view us as an infestation. You don't negotiate with termites. You exterminate them. This is the only play. But what if they manage to disarm it? Asked Secretary of Defense William Carter, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead. They have advanced AI. They could brute force the encryption. They don't have time. Dr. Evelyn Boyd's voice cut through the comms from Cheyenne Mountain, her tone razor sharp. The logic bomb isn't a complex algorithm they can decipher. It's a localized paradox loop. We fed their hyper-advanced AI a mathematical contradiction embedded in a localized spatial coordinate. It's trying to solve a problem that has no solution, and it's consuming 100% of their processing power to do it. They are locked out of their own ship. T-minus 45 seconds. On the flagship, Varric's 4 eyes dilated in sheer terror. The holographic projection of Earth was now flashing a furious, violent crimson. "Commander," the sub-commander stammered, "the inversion sequence has reached the point of no return. We cannot stop the logic bomb. We have one option left. We must vent the plasma reserves and initiate an emergency sublight jump out of the system. If we jump while the gravity tethers are corrupted, the fleet will be torn to pieces in the slipstream," Varric yelled. "If we stay, we will be crushed into singularities," his subordinate countered. "Commander, the humans are insane. They have chained themselves to us and jumped off a cliff. We must flee." Varric looked back at the screen, staring at Sullivan. The human hadn't flinched. He hadn't blinked. He was watching them die with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching microbes under a microscope. Varric realized, with a sickening drop in his twin stomachs, that the humans were not acting out of desperation. This was cold, calculated malice. It was the apex predator's final, venomous bite. "They are bluffing," Varric whispered, though he didn't believe it himself. He lunged toward the communication console. "Human, Sullivan, disengage the weapon, and we will abandon this system. We will leave your world untouched." T-minus 20 seconds. In the bunker, President Kensington looked at Sullivan. "Michael, we have their retreat. Disarm it." Sullivan slowly turned his head to look at the commander-in-chief. "Mr. President, if I disarm it, they will know it was a one-time trap. They will jump out of range, recalibrate their shields, and return in a week with kinetic weapons to drop rocks on us from the asteroid belt. If we let them live, they will come back, and we will have no defense." Kensington's breath hitched. "You're saying we have to let it hit zero?" "I am saying," Sullivan stated, turning back to the camera, "that humanity is about to send a message to the rest of the galaxy." Sullivan leaned into the microphone. "Commander Varric, I am afraid the cancellation codes were automatically deleted the moment I pressed the button. There is no off switch. Welcome to Earth." T-minus 5 seconds. Varric screamed a curse in his native tongue, slamming his fist onto the primary firing console. "Burn them! Burn them all!" The massive plasma cannons on the underside of the dreadnoughts began to glow with a blinding, apocalyptic blue light. But the logic bomb was already consuming the power grid. The cannons sputtered, the energy drawing inward, cannibalized by the malfunctioning gravity drives. T minus 1 second. "Brace for impact," General Reed roared across the command center. 0. It did not happen with a fiery explosion, nor was there a deafening roar. In the vacuum of the upper atmosphere, the destruction of the Kalen subjugation fleet was eerily, terrifyingly silent. Down on the streets of New York, millions of people had their eyes turned skyward, watching the massive, jagged silhouette that blotted out the sun. War correspondents, civilians, and soldiers alike held their breath. At exactly 0 hour, the 36 dreadnoughts simultaneously warped. The visual effect was sickening to the human eye. The laws of physics, which dictated that matter occupies space, were violently overturned. The 5-mile-long ships did not blow outward. They folded inward. The incredibly dense metal of their hulls crumpled like cheap tin foil, crushed by an invisible, omnipotent hand. The gravity drives, forced into an inverted feedback loop by the logic bomb, created 36 localized microsingularities. For a fraction of a microsecond, the mass of each ship was compressed into a space no larger than a marble. And then, the singularities evaporated. The snapback of local spacetime was catastrophic. The immense release of Hawking radiation and exotic matter generated a flash of pure, blinding white light that turned night into day across the globe. People who were looking directly at the sky screamed, throwing their hands over their eyes as retinas were burned by the sheer intensity of the celestial flash. Then came the atmospheric displacement. When you remove 36 objects the size of Manhattan from the atmosphere in a microsecond, the surrounding air violently rushes in to fill the vacuum. "Shockwave imminent," Dr. Boyd shouted over the Cheyenne mountain comms, her voice barely cutting through the static. A deafening, world-shattering thunderclap rolled across the globe. The sonic booms hit the Earth's surface like the hammer of a furious god. In New York, every pane of glass in the city shattered simultaneously, showering the streets in a lethal rain of crystal. In London, the blast knocked people off their feet, rolling cars down the streets as if they were toys. Over the Pacific, the sheer kinetic force of the atmospheric displacement whipped the ocean into an instant frenzy, generating rogue waves that surged toward the coastlines. Deep within Mount Weather, the heavily reinforced bunker violently pitched. Concrete cracked, and dust rained down from the ceiling as the subterranean facility was battered by the seismic tremors. The lights flickered, died, and were instantly replaced by the dim, red glow of the emergency backup generators. Sullivan grabbed the edge of the console to keep from falling. President Kensington was thrown to the floor, his Secret Service agents scrambling to cover his body. The screens displaying the satellite feeds went to static, instantly fried by the massive electromagnetic pulse generated by the dying ships. For 10 agonizing minutes, the world shook. The tectonic plates groaned in protest. Sirens blared across the globe, mingling with the sounds of shattering earth and roaring winds. And then slowly, the shaking stopped. "Report!" General Reed barked, pulling himself up by a steel railing, a fresh cut bleeding over his left eye. "Give me a global assessment, now!" The bunker was a hive of frantic activity. Technicians typed furiously on analog, heavily shielded terminal backups. "Global grid is down, General," a young NSA analyst shouted. "The EMP wiped out civilian infrastructure across the northern hemisphere. Satellites in low Earth orbit are gone, vaporized or fried by the radiation burst." "What about the fleet?" Kensington asked, a Secret Service agent helping him to his feet. He looked terrified, yet utterly desperate for the answer. "Are they gone?" Dr. Boyd's voice came through, heavily distorted by static. The deep earth fiber optic lines to Cheyenne Mountain had survived. Mr. President, the Kalen fleet is destroyed, utterly annihilated. There is nothing left but microscopic dust and residual radiation in the upper atmosphere. The microsingularities evaporated exactly as Sullivan's team predicted. A stunned silence fell over the bunker. It wasn't a cheer of victory. It was the breathless shock of a man who had just played Russian roulette with a fully loaded revolver, pulled the trigger, and heard a click instead of a bang. "Casualties?" Sullivan asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. His suit was covered in dust, but his demeanor remained chillingly calm. "High," Reed answered grimly, looking at the preliminary data feeds trickling in from hardened military outposts. The sonic boom shattered cities. The seismic ripples have triggered minor tsunamis on the Pacific Rim. We're looking at hundreds of thousands dead from the collateral damage alone. Maybe millions once we factor in the collapsed power grids and medical failures. Kensington closed his eyes, the weight of the death toll hitting him. "God forgive us." "God had nothing to do with it, Arthur," Sullivan said flatly. "We traded millions for 8 billion. We kept the planet. We won." "Sir," a radar operator interrupted, his voice pitching upward in sudden panic. "I have a contact. Deep space telemetry just rebooted on the hardened array. We have a surviving vessel." The blood drained from General Reed's face. "Put it on screen, now." Through the static, a tactical map flickered onto the main display. Far beyond the orbit of Earth, hiding in the gravitational shadow of the moon, a single solitary red dot was blinking. "It's a Kalen rearguard vessel," Dr. Boyd analyzed. "Likely a stealth reconnaissance or communications relay ship. It stayed out of the logic bomb's effective range. It wasn't connected to the primary fleet tether." "Do they have weapons?" Kensington asked. "Unknown," Boyd replied, "but their drive signature is flaring. They are charging their sublight engines. They're preparing to run." Sullivan stepped forward, pushing past General Reed to stand directly over the communication technician. "Don't let them run. Hail them. Use the same backdoor frequency. Force the channel open." "Sullivan, what are you doing?" Reed demanded. "We won. Let them run back to their empire and tell them we're too crazy to fight." "No," Sullivan said, his eyes locking onto the blinking red dot. "If they run back terrified, the Kalen Empire will just send automated kill vehicles next time. We don't just need them to fear our madness. We need them to fear our reach." The channel snapped open. There was no visual feed this time, only a frantic, highly synthesized audio transmission echoing through the bunker. The Kalen voice was devoid of the arrogant, metallic, synthesized perfection of Fleet Commander Varak. This voice was shaking, the translation matrix struggling to process the frantic, terrified clicks and hisses of the alien speaker. "Earth! Earth actual! This is observer vessel Vextal. Do not fire. Do not activate your weapons. We are disarming our drives. We surrender. By the ancestors, we surrender." Sullivan stood before the microphone. The dust settling in the red emergency lights of the bunker made him look like a phantom, a specter of the very apocalypse he had just orchestrated. "Observer vessel Vextal," Sullivan spoke, his voice dripping with absolute authority. "This is Michael Sullivan. You have witnessed the fate of the subjugation fleet." We saw the space fold," the Kalen officer babbled, absolute horror bleeding through the audio translator. "You destroyed your own atmosphere. You inverted space. You are monsters. You are suicidal beasts." "We are survivors," Sullivan corrected, his tone razor sharp. "And we are currently pointing the remainder of our quantum logic array directly at your vessel. If you attempt to initiate a sublight jump, I will collapse your ship into a singularity before you clear the orbit of Mars. It was a lie. The logic bomb was entirely spent. The 400,000 satellites were currently raining down into the atmosphere as burning slag. Earth had absolutely nothing left to throw at the alien ship. But the Kalan didn't know that. They had just watched a primitive, level 4 species annihilate a fleet of 36 dreadnoughts in an instant. To them, humans were no longer apes with nukes. They were dark sorcerers of space-time, who possessed weapons of terrifying, self-destructive power. What? What do you want from us? The alien begged. We have no weapons. We are only a relay ship. We monitor the subjugation. Here are my terms, Sullivan dictated, pacing slowly in front of the console. You will immediately transmit your entire historical and scientific database to our Cheyenne Mountain receivers. You will give us the blueprints for your gravity drives, your sublight engines, and your metallurgy protocols. You will hand over every piece of data you have on the Kalan Empire, fleet numbers, homeworld coordinates, defensive perimeters. If we do that, the Emperor will execute our entire lineage, the Kalan wailed. If you don't do that, Sullivan countered smoothly, I will execute you right now, and then I will figure out how to send a gravity bomb through your own communication relays to your homeworld. Make your choice. You have 30 seconds. The bunker held its collective breath. President Kensington watched Sullivan, realizing in that moment that he was no longer the most powerful man in the room. The geopolitical landscape of the world had not just shifted, it had been pulverized. Earth no longer needed diplomats. It needed warlords, and Sullivan was stepping into the role with terrifying ease. 15 seconds passed. Then a massive stream of encrypted data began flooding Cheyenne Mountain servers. We're receiving it, Dr. Boyd confirmed, her voice filled with awe. My God, it's everything. Star maps, propulsion physics, weapon schematics. They are handing us the keys to the galaxy. The data is yours, the Kalan officer said, the voice hollow, defeated. Are we permitted to leave? Sullivan smiled, glancing up at the ceiling of the bunker, as if looking through the miles of rock directly at the stars above. You may leave, Sullivan said, but you are going to take a message back to your Emperor. I want you to broadcast this on every Kalan frequency the moment you reach your territory. What is the message? Sullivan leaned in close to the microphone. Tell your Emperor that Earth is no longer a level 4 infestation. Tell him that we have his technology. Tell him that we learn very, very fast. And tell him that if a single Kalan ship ever crosses into our solar system again, we won't wait for them to demand our surrender. Sullivan paused, letting the silence stretch for maximum effect. Tell him we will come for his world next, and we won't bring an army. We will bring the void. Sullivan out. He reached forward and slammed the button to sever the connection. The room was deathly quiet. Slowly, the primary backup generators kicked in, and the harsh fluorescent lights flickered back to life, banishing the red emergency glow. The screens booted back up, showing the tactical map. The single red dot representing the Kalan ship was moving rapidly away from Earth, fleeing into the depths of space as fast as its engines could carry it. General Reed let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 minutes. He slumped against the railing. They're gone. For now, Sullivan said, turning away from the console. He walked back to the mahogany table and picked up his briefcase. Mr. President, General, the immediate threat is neutralized. but we have a colossal mess to clean up on the surface. A mess? Kensington let out a humorless, near hysterical laugh. Michael, the grid is fried. Cities are in ruins. The global economy doesn't exist anymore. No, it doesn't, Sullivan agreed calmly, which means we have a unique opportunity. The old world ended 10 minutes ago. The nations of Earth don't matter anymore. Borders don't matter. We are no longer Americans, or French, or Chinese. We are the species that just killed gods. Sullivan opened his briefcase, taking out a pristine, physical folder. He slid it across the table toward the president. "What is this?" Kensington asked, staring at the folder as if it were a bomb. "The Vanguard Initiative," Sullivan replied. "We now possess the complete technological database of an interstellar empire. We have reverse engineered their weapons in theory. Now we build them in practice. We are going to militarize the entire planet. We will build orbital shipyards. We will construct a fleet that doesn't rely on gravity tethers, but on pure human kinetic engineering, married to Kalin space-time physics." Dr. Boyd spoke up over the comms, a spark of scientific fervor cutting through her exhaustion. "With this data, Sullivan is right. Give my teams 5 years, and we won't just rebuild. We will leap forward 1,000 years. We will become an interstellar power," General Reed muttered, the realization dawning on him. The fear in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a hard, calculating glint. "We take the fight to them." "Exactly," Sullivan said, snapping his briefcase shut. "They wanted to subjugate us because they thought we were weak. We are going to show them that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our absolute, unapologetic ruthlessness when we are backed into a corner." Sullivan walked toward the heavy blast doors, his footsteps echoing in the quiet command center. He paused at the threshold and looked back at the leaders of the old world. "Gentlemen," Sullivan said, his eyes hard and cold as shattered ice, "we have a galaxy to conquer." The sky over what used to be Geneva was no longer blue. It was a perpetual, hazy smog of industrial gray, streaked with the fiery contrails of heavy-lift orbital rockets. 5 years had passed since the day of the black sky. 5 years since 36 alien dreadnoughts had been crushed into subatomic dust in Earth's upper atmosphere, plunging the planet into an apocalyptic dark age of shattered grids and flooded coastlines. But humanity did not die in the dark. Instead, it woke up, rubbed the blood from its eyes, and got to work. Deep inside the heavily fortified subterranean headquarters of the newly formed United Earth Command in Colorado, Michael Sullivan stood before a massive, holographic projection of the Sol system. He looked older. The gray in his hair had completely taken over, and the sharp lines of his face were deeply entrenched, carved by half a decade of unsleeping, ruthless ambition. He was no longer just an advisor. As the Supreme Director of the Vanguard Initiative, Sullivan was, for all intents and purposes, the architect of humanity's vengeance. "Director," Dr. Evelyn Boyd's voice echoed through the cavernous command center. She walked down the metal gantry, a tablet clutched to her chest. She looked exhausted, fueled by nothing but synthetic stimulants and pure spite. "Lockheed Martin and Boeing have just completed the final weld on the hull of the Oppenheimer. SpaceX orbital tugs are moving the primary drive core into position as we speak." Sullivan didn't look away from the holographic map. "And the drive core stability?" "Solid," Boyd replied, swiping her tablet to bring up a schematic of a brutal, ugly, blocky spacecraft that looked less like a starship and more like a massive, flying anvil. Integrating Kalen's space-time physics with human-heavy engineering was a nightmare. Their ships were grown, Sullivan. Biometallic structures designed for elegance and energy efficiency. We threw all that out. The Oppenheimer is essentially a solid block of scavenged alien metamaterials wrapped around a hyper-accelerated nuclear reactor. It's heavy, it's ugly, and it handles like a brick. But with the modified gravity drives, it can take a direct hit from a plasma battery and not even rattle the coffee cups in the mess hall. Elegance doesn't win wars, Evelyn. Kinetic energy does, Sullivan murmured. What about the navigation networks? Did the teams at Palantir and CrowdStrike finish scrubbing the Kalen database? Boyd smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. They did more than scrub it, Michael. 4 years ago, Richard Fisher's team at Palantir found a Trojan horse buried deep in the Kalen astrometrics data they handed us. It was a subspace beacon. The moment we activated a gravity drive, it was supposed to ping the Kalen Emperor and give away our exact coordinates and technological progress. Sullivan finally turned his gaze away from the stars to look at her. I assume Fisher didn't just delete it. Delete it? No, Boyd laughed. We're humans. We weaponized it. Fisher's software engineers essentially put a ghost in their machine. For the last 5 years, that beacon has been transmitting fabricated telemetry back to the Kalen Empire. As far as their emperor knows, the atmospheric collapse on Earth caused a runaway greenhouse effect. They think our surface is a boiling wasteland of sulfur and radiation, and that humanity went completely extinct 3 years ago. Sullivan nodded slowly. Good. The element of surprise is the only tactical advantage we have. They think we're a graveyard. We need to make sure they are completely unprepared when the dead rise. The doors to the command center hissed open, and former General, now Grand Admiral Thomas Reed, strode in. He was flanked by heavily armed guards wearing power-assisted exosuits, derivatives of the Boston Dynamics robotics programs, heavily up-armored and scaled for infantry warfare. Sullivan! Reed barked, slapping a physical file onto the hollow table. The Vanguard fleet is green-lit. We have 3 super-heavy dreadnoughts, 12 strike cruisers, and 40 destroyer-class escorts sitting in the orbital shadow of the moon. All manned, all armed. The global industrial complex has completely depleted our planetary reserves of tungsten and depleted uranium to manufacture the munitions, but the railguns are fully loaded. How are the crews? Sullivan asked. Thirsty for blood, Reed answered bluntly. Every single man and woman on those ships lost someone on the day of the black sky. They aren't looking for a diplomatic mission. They are looking to burn something down. Then let's give them a target, Sullivan said, bringing up the stolen Kalen star map. He zoomed in on a cluster of stars roughly 12 light-years from Earth. He tapped a large, glowing green sphere. Tarkus Prime. According to the database, it's the Kalen Empire's primary forward operating base for this quadrant of the galaxy. It's a logistical hub, a shipyard, and a staging ground. It's where they build the subjugation fleets. It's heavily defended, Boyd warned, analyzing the data. Orbital defense platforms, a planetary shield, and an estimated garrison of 200 warships. They are warships designed to fight enemies who use plasma and lasers, Reed countered with a grim smile. They rely on energy diffusion shields. They've never fought a species crazy enough to use mass-accelerated kinetic slugs. Their shields won't know what to do with a 100-ton block of dense tungsten moving at a fraction of the speed of light. Sullivan leaned over the table, staring at the projection of the alien world. Admiral Reed, Sullivan said, his voice dropping to a cold, quiet register. Take the fleet, jump to Tarkus Prime. Leave nothing but ash. The silence of space in the dark side of the moon was shattered by the rippling tear of artificial gravity wells. Aboard the bridge of the flagship EVF Oppenheimer, Captain Robert Mitchell stared out through the heavily armored viewport. Mitchell was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He had been a submarine commander before the sky turned black, a man accustomed to the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Now he was preparing to dive into an entirely different kind of abyss. "All ships in formation, Captain," his first officer, Commander Sarah Jenkins, reported from the tactical station. "Drives are spooled. Slipspace coordinates are locked for Tarkus Prime. We are ready to break the void." Mitchell looked at the tactical display. The human fleet was an exercise in brutalist efficiency. There were no sleek curves, no bioluminescent aesthetics. They were jagged gunmetal gray leviathans bristling with heavy artillery. Along the spine of the Oppenheimer ran a Class 5 magnetic accelerator cannon, a weapon so massive it essentially meant the ship was a gun with engines strapped to the back of it. "Communicate to the fleet," Mitchell ordered, his voice echoing through the comms of every human ship in orbit. 5 years ago, an empire of arrogant monsters came to our home. They looked down at us from their shining ships and told us we were nothing but insects. They expected us to roll over and die. Today, we show them exactly what happens when you try to step on a hornet's nest. Spin up the drives. Let's go introduce ourselves. Drives engaging in 3, 2, 1, mark. Space didn't just bend, it shattered. The scavenged Kalin gravity drives, overloaded by human-built nuclear reactors, tore a violent, ragged hole in the fabric of space-time. The human fleet didn't glide into the slipstream with the quiet elegance of Kalin vessels. They violently punched their way through, dragging a wake of localized radiation and spatial distortion behind them. The journey took exactly 4 minutes. For the crews inside, it felt like being strapped to the inside of a concrete mixer during an earthquake. Human physiology was not meant to withstand the sheer gravitational shearing of a forced sublight jump, even with the internal inertial dampeners cranked to maximum. When the swirling vortex of hyperspace finally snapped away, replaced by the cold, hard starlight of the Tarki system, half the crew on the Oppenheimer were bleeding from their noses. "Status!" Mitchell roared, gripping the railing to steady himself as the massive ship groaned in protest. "We have exited slipspace," Jenkins reported, her hands flying across the tactile keyboards. "Coordinates are perfect. We are sitting in high orbit above Tarkus Prime. And Captain, we caught them with their pants down." Mitchell looked at the primary optical sensors. The Kalin staging ground was massive. A sprawling orbital ring encircled the green and blue planet, teeming with hundreds of sleek crimson alien warships docked in their moorings. The orbital defense platforms, massive floating fortresses, were slowly rotating, completely unaware of the threat that had just materialized in their blind spot. Because of the Palantir-engineered Ghost beacon, the Kalin long-range sensors had classified the spatial disturbance not as an incoming fleet, but as a routine cosmic anomaly. "They aren't raising shields," Jenkins said, a hint of awe and disbelief in her voice. "They don't even know we're here. Their fleet is totally powered down." Mitchell didn't hesitate. There was no time for awe. There was only the mission. "Lock targeting solutions," Mitchell commanded, his voice cold and flat. "Target the orbital defense platforms first. I want their teeth kicked in before they realize they're in a fight. Spool the spinal Mac guns. Load the depleted uranium sabots." Throughout the human fleet, The low, terrifying hum of magnetic coils charging echoed through the corridors. Massive loading mechanisms slammed car-sized slugs of ultra-dense metal into the firing chambers. "Targets locked, Captain." Fire. It was a display of catastrophic, primitive violence. The human ships didn't fire beams of light. They fired mass. From the nose of the Oppenheimer and its sister dreadnoughts, massive slugs of depleted uranium were hurled out into the void at 10% the speed of light. In the vacuum of space, there was no sound, but the sheer kinetic transfer when the slugs hit their targets was blinding. The Kalen orbital defense platforms relied on energy dispersion shields designed to absorb and scatter plasma fire. When the human kinetic slugs hit those shields, they didn't scatter. They punched straight through the energy barriers like bullets through tissue paper. The impacts were devastating. The kinetic energy of the slugs transferred instantly into the super-dense biometal of the Kalen stations. Whole platforms simply shattered, exploding outward in a chaotic shower of molten shrapnel and venting atmosphere. Within 10 seconds, humanity had entirely decapitated the orbital defense grid of the Kalen Empire's most vital staging ground. Only then did the alien alarms begin to scream. On the surface of Tarkus Prime, Planetary Governor Xylok was jolted from his restorative stasis pod by the deafening shriek of the Citadel's klaxons. He rushed to the grand balcony of his spire, looking up at the sky. What he saw defied logic. The orbital ring, the pride of the Kalen industrial machine, was in ruins. Burning debris was raining down into the atmosphere, streaking across the sky like a localized meteor shower. And hovering in the high orbit, silhouetted against the stars, were dark, ugly, angular ships he had never seen before. "Report!" Xylok screamed into his communication band. "Who is attacking us? Is it the Valthorian Ascendancy? Have they broken the treaty?" His tactical officer's voice came back, trembling with a fear Xylok had never heard from a Kalen soldier. "Governor, the signature codes, the bioscans, they don't match the Valthorians." "Then who is it?" "It's Earth, Governor. The level 4 infestation. The humans. They are here." Xylok froze. "Impossible. Earth is a dead world. The beacon confirms it." "The beacon was a lie!" the officer shrieked as another massive kinetic impact rocked the Citadel, shaking dust from the crystalline ceiling. "Governor, they are using mass accelerators. Our shields cannot stop solid matter moving at these velocities. Our docked fleet is being torn to pieces in their moorings. We cannot spool our drives fast enough to engage." "Launch the interceptors! Swarm them!" Xylok commanded, panic finally gripping his hearts. From the surface of the planet, thousands of Kalen interceptors launched from hidden silos, streaming upward like a swarm of angry crimson locusts. They were fast, agile, and armed with deadly plasma lances. Aboard the Oppenheimer, Captain Mitchell watched the swarm rising on the tactical display. "Incoming interceptors, Captain. Estimated numbers in the thousands," Jenkins reported. "Let them come," Mitchell said calmly. "Deploy the flak screens. Show them how we handle bug swarms." Along the broadsides of the human ships, hundreds of automated turrets spun to life. But they didn't fire lasers. They fired millions of rounds of proximity-fused shrapnel. As the Kalen interceptors closed the distance, the space between them and the human fleet suddenly became a wall of exploding tungsten fragments. The elegant, lightly armored alien fighters flew directly into a meat grinder. The flak ripped through their hulls, shredding their delicate anti-gravity engines and tearing the pilots to pieces. The vacuum of space was filled with the silent, brilliant explosions of thousands of alien fighters turning into expanding clouds of debris. "Swarm neutralized, Captain," Jenkins said, not looking up from her console. "We have absolute orbital supremacy. Target is painted for Phase 2. Mitchell nodded. "Put me on a secure, broadband channel. Override their planetary communications. Use the same backdoor they used on us 5 years ago." Down on the surface, Governor Zylock was frantically trying to order an evacuation of the Citadel, when every screen, every holographic display, and every audio emitter in the city suddenly locked to a single feed. The image of Michael Sullivan appeared. He was sitting at his mahogany desk in the underground bunker in Colorado, casually sipping from a cup of black coffee. He looked directly into the camera, an expression of mild amusement on his face. Zylock stared at the screen, paralyzed. "Governor of Tarkus Prime," Sullivan's voice echoed through the burning alien city, perfectly translated into the Kalan tongue. "My name is Michael Sullivan. 5 Earth years ago, your fleet commander Varek visited my world. He told us we were an infestation. He told us to surrender or die." Sullivan took a slow sip of his coffee. "I told him, you first. We kept our promise." "Barbarian!" Zylock screamed at the hologram, though he knew the human couldn't hear him. "You primitive beasts! Our emperor will glass your world. He will send 100 fleets." As if answering the governor's thoughts, Sullivan smiled softly. "Now you are probably expecting us to demand your surrender. You are probably waiting for an ultimatum, just like the one you gave us. But humanity has learned a lot from the Kalan Empire. We learned that when you have your boot on the neck of a threat, you don't ask it to yield." Sullivan's eyes darkened, the amusement vanishing, replaced by a chilling, absolute void of mercy. "You snap its neck, Captain Mitchell. Execute Phase 2. The holographic feed cut out. "Phase 2 authorized," Mitchell commanded from orbit. "Drop the pods." From the bellies of the human dreadnoughts, thousands of heavily armored drop pods were ejected into the gravity well of Tarkus Prime. They plummeted through the atmosphere, glowing white-hot with the friction of re-entry. They didn't target the civilian centers. They targeted the military outposts, the shield generators, and the command citadels. When the pods slammed into the earth, the doors blew outward with explosive bolts. But human soldiers did not step out. Instead, heavily armored, autonomous war mechs poured into the Kalan city. Designed by the unified engineering minds of Earth's defense contractors, these machines were bipedal nightmares of titanium and depleted uranium, armed with shoulder-mounted rotary cannons and localized gravity crushers. They moved with terrifying insectoid speed, processing battlefield data at 1,000,000 calculations per second. The Kalan ground forces, equipped with elegant plasma rifles, poured into the streets to defend their citadel. But their plasma fire merely scorched the heavy ablative armor of the human mechs. In return, the mechs opened fire with 30mm armor-piercing rounds, literally tearing the alien soldiers and their fortifications to shreds in a storm of deafening, concussive violence. It wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. Zylock watched from his balcony as his elite royal guard was mowed down in seconds by a single, relentless human machine. The mech didn't pause, didn't hesitate, and didn't show fear. It simply acquired targets and erased them from existence. Above, the human dreadnoughts slowly repositioned themselves, their massive railguns now pointing directly down at the planetary surface, ready to crack the crust if the ground forces failed. Back on Earth, Michael Sullivan watched the telemetry feed streaming in from Tarkus Prime. General Reed stood beside him in silence, watching the culmination of 5 years of human rage being unleashed upon the stars. "They are routing," Reed said quietly. "The governor's compound has fallen. The shipyards are ours. Tarkis is broken." "It's just the first stepping stone," Sullivan said, pulling up the Kalen galactic map. It was vast, filled with thousands of glowing red dots representing Kalen-controlled worlds. He reached out and tapped the largest dot at the center of the map, the Kalen homeworld. "We took their tech. We took their staging ground," Sullivan said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Now, we take their empire. Tell the Vanguard fleet to refuel and rearm from the alien wreckage." Sullivan looked up, his eyes reflecting the cold, hard light of the holographic stars. "Tell the Emperor of the Kalen, humanity is coming. The universe is a dark forest, but humanity just lit a bonfire. If you enjoyed this epic sci-fi journey of survival, spite, and absolute human dominance, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to fuel the Vanguard fleet, and share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans who love a good humanity fuck yeah tale. We're just getting started exploring the darkest, most thrilling corners of sci-fi storytelling. Want to see what happens when the EVF reaches the Kalen homeworld? Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. What would your first order be as captain of a human dreadnought? Stay vigilant, stay human, and we'll see you in the next transmission.